Hello and welcome to, let's see, the 1, 2, 3, this is the third from last lecture that I'm going to be posting for you guys. So today we're going to get through interest groups. Monday, I'm going to post my lecture on voting, campaigns, and elections. And then Tuesday, I'm going to post your final quiz, your quiz 4. So be prepared for that. It will include both lectures from this week and the voting, campaigns, and elections lecture from Monday. That will be your last quiz. And then the following week, November 23rd week, we will have your final I can't talk, your final lecture on media power and political communication. And will be posted the same day maybe it's not November 23rd. Why are my dates? It's due November 24th. Okay, let me start over. November 24th, I will post your final lecture on media power and political communication. That is when your final essay is due, the final day of lectures. I know it's not technically your final day of classes. You have a week of, I think they call it remote learning or remote work week in college. That's like intended to be your week to study for exams. So your essay is going to be due on the day of your final lecture, November 24th. November 24th. And then your final exam will be posted on Monday, December 7th. And it's going to be exactly the same as your other exams. It's just going to cover, it may cover some of the material from the entire semester, but it will mostly cover material that we've covered since your last exam. I've had a few questions about the essay. Mostly I'm concerned with answering the question and having 3 to 5 pages and citations. I need you to cite your work. I don't want you citing like Wikipedia and things like that. You can use your textbook as one of your citations, but make sure you use another one. I need you to have at least 2 sources. And that's what I'm mostly concerned about. The formatting, I don't really care a lot about because you're copying and pasting it into Blackboard, and we're probably going to lose some formatting that way anyway. So make sure the length is long enough when you have it in Microsoft Word that it's 3 to 5 pages double-spaced. And then you copy and paste it. If the formatting gets messed up, do not worry about that. I know a lot of your classes are teaching you to do certain sort of citations. That's not something that I'm worried about right now. I'm concerned with content and citations. I don't care how it looks. If you have any questions about that, let me know. I know that our final day of class, we're talking about the media, and that's what this essay is about. That was intentional. I'm not going to be able to post that lecture earlier. I want to kind of you guys to know already what I'm talking about a little bit when I post that lecture. I think that's all the housekeeping items I have for you. So today we'll get through interest groups. Like I said, Monday we'll get through the voting, campaigns, and elections. And then on Tuesday, I'll post your last quiz. The next Monday is the final essay due. Whoa, uh-oh. Their final essay is due. She's looking at me like, how did I do that? Final essay is due and our final lecture will be posted. That will be November 24th is the last day that we have lectures, and then your exam will be posted on December 7th. Okay, now let's get through, let me close out that tab. Let me get through interest groups with you guys today. And please always email me if you have questions. I try to get back to you as soon as I can. Sometimes there's a lot going on at my house. I have 2 other kids that aren't here right now, plus little Betsy. And I have a full-time job as a lobbyist. So I try my best to get back to you guys as soon as I can. If I've ever missed your email, please let me know. I hope I don't let anything slip through the cracks. But please, if for some reason I haven't gotten back to you, let me know. Also, if you haven't taken the second exam, please let me know as soon as possible. I'm trying to get everything graded and put into the system. So reach out to me as soon as possible on that. Okay, interest groups. In 1994, there was a healthcare reform initiative. And there was a couple called Harry and Louise in a commercial. It featured this worried couple, Harry and Louise, discussing their fears about government-run healthcare. And the public was really persuaded that if government was involved in healthcare, they would lose their freedom about what doctor to see, what care to receive. It fit this pre-existing narrative of dangers of big government. At the time, President Clinton really failed to counter this effectively, and the healthcare industry really scored a major victory here. What are you eating, Betsy? What is that? Are you good? Okay. And so healthcare reform was dead for at least the next 16 years. So Obama came in trying to avoid these same mistakes. The lessons that were learned here were to get Congress involved from the start and to do something to bring relevant interest groups to the table. You didn't want the healthcare industry trying to kill Obamacare when he was trying to pass that. But what was at stake with an Obama like kind of consorting with the enemy, kind of bringing these healthcare groups to the table? Was it bringing them to the reform process to prevent them from defining a like negative strategy? Was that too great to bear? French observer Alexis de Tocqueville, I can't say how his last name, anyway, Tocqueville, y'all, I'm from South Carolina. He noted the particular tendency for Americans to always join forces. We join forces with our friends, with our neighbors, with our colleagues. And he said Americans of all ages, of all conditions, and all dispositions constantly form associations. They not only have commercial and manufacturing companies in which all take part, but associations of lots of other kinds: religious, moral, serious, futile, general, restricted, enormous, or diminutive. And now with social media, we're connected in ways that he couldn't have even imagined. This didn't refer specifically to factions, but as we talked about last class, Madison had already noted Americans had a propensity to form political associations or factions, groups of citizens united by some common interest or passions, and opposed to the rights of other citizens of the whole community. So we said, kind of a little bit last class, I touched on this, that Madison feared that factions would weaken and destabilize a republic, but he also believed, as he argued in Federalist Number 10, that a large republic could really contain the effects of factions by making it hard for potential members to find one another, and by providing so many potential political groups that if they did find each other and organize, their very numbers would cancel each other out. So now we call these interest groups. We don't really call them factions. Interest groups are an organization of individuals who share a common political goal and unite for the purpose of influencing government decisions. Parties seek to influence policy, but they do so by sponsoring candidates in elections and running governments. Political scientists don't believe that all interest groups are opposed to broad public interest the way Madison thought they were. They think maybe that interest groups play an important role in our democracy, and they ensure the views of organized interests are heard in the governing process. They play a central role in the pluralist theory of democracy that argues that democracy is enhanced when citizens' interests are represented through group membership. But the group interactions ensure that members' interests are represented, but also that no group can become too powerful. Interest groups have always existed, but they weren't really a major force until the beginning of the 20th century, when progressive reformers opened up political process to the people. By the 1960s, DC was full of interest groups activities, and this has continued still. Bless you, bless you. Interest groups really began to accelerate after 1971 when the Federal Election Campaign Act was passed. This really sought to regulate the amount of money an interest group could give to candidates running for office. We talked a little bit last class about PACs, political action committees. These are fundraising arms of interest groups. They're limited in how much they can donate to a candidate, but there are loopholes. We talked about Citizens United last class that allow them to get around some of the restrictions. A super PAC is a special PAC that can spend an unlimited amount of money on a candidate's behalf, but they're not allowed to coordinate their efforts with those of the candidate's campaign. A lot of them are creatures of interest groups, but others are independent and act as interest groups in their own rights. So we're waiting for Georgia to get their Senate election results in. They have a runoff. And we suddenly saw yesterday a ton of new PACs created related to Georgia. One of them was called Blue Georgia. One of them was called Turning Georgia Blue. I mean, just all of these special PACs that were created just for one specific purpose. And this point was, to get out the vote for the Georgia special election for the Senate. Madison would probably roll over in his grave with the explosion of interest group activity today. He thought he'd secured the republic against the mischiefs of faction, and he really couldn't have imagined a world where mass transportation and communication systems would shrink the large size of the republic that he thought would isolate these groups. Critics also argue that interest groups have too much power and that they unduly influence officials who would want their financial support, and that they don't effectively represent the interest groups that don't organize, like the poor, the homeless, the young. A lot of supporters echo Madison's pluralistic hopes that group politics can preserve political stability by containing and regulating conflict and by providing checks on any one group's power. So how did interest groups really form? And why do most people join groups? Most of us know that public problems, we can think of public problems that we think should be addressed, like a pothole, streets that are too dark at night, tuition is too high, but we rarely act together to solve these problems, right? We don't necessarily organize a group, and sometimes we don't even join a group. So this is a collective action problem. This is the difficulty in getting people to work together to achieve a common goal when the solution is costly and no one individual has the incentive to make it happen. Collective good. This is a good or service that by its very nature cannot be denied to anyone who wants to consume it. Safe roads, public safety, better education, sustainability of the planet. These are collective goods that once produced can be enjoyed by anyone. So it's difficult to get people to join these groups because they're going to reap the benefits anyway. Free riders are people who refuse to spend the time and money and effort because they can reap the benefit whether they join or not. So the most interest groups are organized around shared interests, but many people who share interests never organize at all. A key triggering mechanism for formation is a disturbance in the political, social, or economic environment that threatens the members of a group and alerts them that they need to organize to protect their interests. The formation of one group often triggers the formation of a group on the opposing side. So, I said these super PACs are forming for Turning Georgia Blue. Well, there's probably a PAC that has formed for Turning Georgia Red. They're going to be there to oppose each other. Some groups form more easily, even without an external threat. So the resources available seem to really be key. More money means a better website, social networking campaign, and so on and so forth. Effective and charismatic leaders can also help spur the formation of an interest group. For example, Ralph Nader founded a number of consumer interest groups. Candy Lightner founded Mothers Against Drunk Driving, things like that. Groups frequently use selective incentives to induce people to join. Selective incentives are benefits that are available only to group members as an inducement to get them to join. These include material benefits, solidary benefits, expressive benefits. A material benefit is a selective incentive in form of a tangible reward. For example, you may get a magazine that your group publishes. What is that, Betsy? What are you putting in your mouth? What is that? Hi. If the NRA sponsors a free hunting competition. The Arbor Day Foundation offers free trees if you join. So those are material benefits. Solidary benefits you may receive are for selective incentives in the form of tangible rewards. Some people find politics enjoyable and of intangible rewards, some people find politics enjoyable and the social interaction satisfactory, making that a strong motivating force. So maybe you want to join a group because you're going to be around people who believe the same things as you. Those are solidary benefits. Expressive benefits are selective incentives that derive from the opportunity to express values and beliefs that you're committed to doing something good, a greater cause. You're doing something that you strongly believe in, like the National Right to Life really believes passionately in making abortions illegal. Their membership in the group is a way of expressing these views and ideals. These are expressive benefits. So what are some of the roles of interest groups? Interest groups are integral, but are they a curse like Madison thought? They play important roles in political representation and participation and education and agenda building. It's possible that the most important thing necessarily about you is not where you live, but congressional representation really sticks to where you live, right? It doesn't stick to our interests as related to anything outside of where home is. So interest groups help represent your views to DC. Lobbying, that's what I do. Interest group activities that are aimed at persuading policymakers to support the group's positions. It's the central activity of interest groups and encompasses a variety of ways of bringing pressure to bear on government. Participation, the opportunities for participation in government are pretty limited by the Constitution. So these interest groups provide an avenue for citizen participation in politics that goes beyond voting. Education, some interest groups have an important role in educating policymakers. A lot of, I've said before, members of Congress have a lot on their plates, and they can't be an expert at everything. So they often find themselves legislating on matters where they don't really have a ton of knowledge. And so interest groups can help fill this void because they can provide details and hearings and briefings where they are the experts. Agenda building, interest groups really work on getting the issues they care about onto the agendas in DC and making them a priority for action. Provision of program alternatives. Once they're on a program agenda, interest groups supply alternative suggestions for how they should be dealt. From this mix, political actors really select a resolution. And then program monitoring. Once laws are enacted, interest groups really keep tabs on their consequences and inform Congress and regulatory agencies about their effects, both intended and unintended. What are the types of interest groups? There are different types of interest groups: economic, equal opportunity, public, government. Economic interest groups are groups that organize to influence government policy for the economic benefit of their members. They can be benefits like higher wages, lower taxes, bigger government subsidies, more favorable regulations. They're all like pocketbook issues, right? And then corporations and business associations, the government plays a big role in regulating the economy and defining the ground rules for economic competition. So a lot of interest groups have their own lobbies in DC or professionals that are related. When Dodd-Frank Wall Street reform was passed in 2010, there was about $1.5 million a day spent to influence the implementation of it by Wall Street. Issues here can be taxes, labor, regulatory issues, education, welfare reform, health insurance. A lot of like 600 corporations keep full-time DC offices to deal with government relations, not counting those who hire independent lobbyists or those who lobby in cooperation with other businesses. And then businesses also join together in associations like the Associated Builders and Contractors, the Business Roundtable, the Chambers of Commerce. These represent a lot of businesses that band together that spend heavily on elections. Unions and professional associations. Interest groups don't often organize in response to each other. Interest groups do often organize in response to each other, right? So labor unions don't represent the force in society that they once did, but they still are formidable. For example, like the AFL-CIO, the United Auto Workers, United Mine Workers. Public employees are another large segment of American union-represented workforce. The American Federation of Government Employees, teachers, firefighters, they all have large unions that wield significant influence on matters in their political or their particular interest areas. A lot of occupations that require specific training or education have professional associations, like the American Medical Association lobbies to lower medical malpractice awards and things like that. Then there are agricultural interest groups. Farming is interesting. We all depend on food, but it's also subject to things like climate and forces beyond human nature. Oh, hi. So the United States has long subsidized and regulated agriculture to keep food at affordable levels. Less than 2% of the United States workforce is involved in farming, but there's a large network of interest groups that pursue policies favorable to agriculture, like the Farm Bureau, and things like that. Equal opportunity interest groups. These are groups that organize to promote the civil and economic rights of underrepresented or disadvantaged groups. They often advocate because they're economically disadvantaged or at risk of becoming so, or believe their members are unrepresented, not because of what they do or because of who they are, but membership isn't limited to people who are part of that demographic group, because many people believe that promoting the interests and rights of various groups in society is in the broader interest of all of us. Sometimes these are called public interest groups. One of these is age. One of the fastest growing segments of the United States population is composed of people ages 65 and older. So AARP, established in 1961, has nearly 38 million members. Maybe because it only takes $16 a year to be a member, and you enjoy a lot of benefits like reduced health insurance and travel discounts. Groups based on race and ethnicity. The NAACP, founded in 1909 in response to race riots. The League of United Latin American Citizens advocates for the rights of Hispanics. The National Council of La Raza, focusing on immigration reform. And then you have groups based on gender, the National Organization for Women, that deals with equal treatment of women. Emily's List, a PAC that contributes money to Democratic women candidates. American Coalitions for Fathers and Children, formed around promoting divorced men's custodial rights, but really men's groups pale in comparison to the funding, membership, and national exposure of women's groups. Side note, I don't know if I mentioned, a large number of women were elected in this last cycle, including our new vice president. And I think that's just really incredible, and I want to make a note of that, that we have one of the largest groups of women in Congress right now that we ever have. So girls, ladies, it's our turn. Are we running for office? My daughter says she wants to. She's 2. My son is 4, and he says he's not going to do that because he's going to be playing sports. But she says she thinks she'll be president. I don't know if I want that for her. Anyway, the other groups could be based on sexual orientation. The sexual revolution of the 60s and 70s brought about some gay and lesbian groups, and they are officially nonpartisan, but are usually tied to the Democratic Party. Public interest groups are groups that organize to influence government to produce collective goods or service that are a benefit to all the general public. Like I said, benefits of clean air are available to all, not just members of the group that fought for them. They're usually motivated by a view of the world that they think everyone else would be better off if they adopted. People are drawn to public interest groups because they support the group's values and goals. Expressive benefits are the primary draw for membership. When an event occurs that threatens the goals of a public interest group, membership increases. So, for example, when Reagan was elected, a lot of people flocked to groups like the Sierra Club and the National Wildlife Federation because they were afraid that he would dismantle environmental laws. When Clinton signed the Brady Bill, requiring a waiting period before buying a gun, the NRA saw their membership increase. Hi. In 1970, Earth Day kind of happened, and environmental groups have become actively engaged in promoting environmental policies. You also have folks like Earth First who called for direct action, including building and living in aerial platforms to dissuade the timber industry from felling trees. Consumer groups, Ralph Nader and his Public Citizen became synonymous with consumer protectionism. Religious groups, they have had a long history of interest group activity dating back to the abolitionist movement. They respond to what they describe as the moral decay and decadence of American society. Pat Robertson developed the Christian Broadcasting Network, in 1976, and James Dodson's focus on the family radio broadcast, they helped to educate and mobilize evangelical Christians on political issues nationwide. Second Amendment groups, obviously the NRA is opposed to almost any efforts to control and regulate the sale and distribution of firearms. Everytown for Gun Safety was founded in the wake of the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary. You have reproductive rights groups. The Supreme Court decision in Roe versus Wade, that granted women the right to an abortion, generated a number of interest groups. You have your Planned Parenthood groups, you have your National Right to Life Committee on the other side. And then other public interest groups can be public interest groups target the issue of human rights, like the ACLU, Amnesty International, Animal Rights, the Humane Society, PETA. And then you have government interest groups. These are groups that are organized to represent foreign or domestic governments and to lobby Congress and the president on their behalf. I sort of work in this world. I mostly lobby on behalf of other governments. I represent towns and municipalities. Most of my clients are in Nevada, a few in other places, but they band together to lobby Congress on their behalf. When you have a foreign government who is looking for a lobbyist, that's typically where you have a very lucrative career, not necessarily in local government like myself. Interest group politics, the term lobbying comes from the 17th century in England, where representatives of special interests would meet members of the English House of Commons in the large anteroom or lobby outside the Commons floor to plead their cases. I always thought of this, I was a page at the State House when I was at Carolina, and a lot of the lobbyists would literally hang out in the lobby waiting for the members of the State House to come out of the chambers, and they would meet with them in the lobby. But a lot of the lobbying, most of the lobbying now reaches far beyond the lobby of the House or the floor of the Senate. I don't even live in D.C. anymore, and I'm a D.C. lobbyist. We do directly contact lawmakers, but we're no longer confined to chance meetings in a legislative lobby. I will schedule phone calls with members of Congress. I will schedule phone calls with the White House. Right now, a lot of it's done via Zoom or FaceTime. Direct lobbying is direct interaction with public officials for the purposes of influencing a policy decision, sometimes called inside lobbying. And then you have indirect lobbying, which is an attempt to influence government policymakers by encouraging the general public to put pressure on them. This can be like a political protest or a social movement to make a demand heard. So direct lobbying. When an interest group lobbies Congress, this is what I do. When we are lobbying Congress, we are rarely focused on all 435 members of the House or 100 members on the Senate. We are focused on the congressional committee where the bills are written and revised, the delegation who is representing us. I spend a lot of my time dealing with the transportation committee because I have a client who cares a lot about transportation issues. I spend a lot of my time talking to the 2 senators from Nevada because a lot of my clients are in Nevada. I'm not focused on the entirety of DC. You are really focusing on specific people and specific places to get your work done. Some of the strategies for congressional lobbying: personal contacts, appointments, banquets, parties, lunches, casual meetings in the hallways of Congress. Y'all, that's all pre-COVID. I guess we don't do that anymore. That's the most common and most effective form of lobbying. A lot of what I do is based on my years in DC and the contacts that I have made. I will have a client say, oh, I'm having this problem. And I say, oh, I actually know somebody who works on the committee that handles that. Let me give them a call and you guys can talk and come up with a solution together. That's what a lobbyist does. I don't come up with the solutions. I just introduce the people to each other so they know how to talk to each other to find their solutions, right? Most of modern lobbying involves the use of professional lobbyists. Access to power and knowledge about how our government works is key. And so a lot of us are former people who've worked in the government. A lot of people are former government officials. My boss is a former congressman, so he has a lot of access. The revolving door, this is the tendency of public officials and journalists and lobbyists to move between public and private sector jobs. So, I work for Congressman Porter. He was a former congressman from Nevada. He went through the revolving door. He went from being a member of Congress to working in the private sector. And sometimes they go back and forth. Sometimes there are attempts at regulations and debates about whether people should be able to convert this public service into a private profit, and whether such incentive draws people into public offices for motivations other than serving the public interest. I don't think that most of us go to work in DC saying, oh, one day I'm just doing this so I get experience so I can be a lobbyist to make a lot of money one day. I think most people go in there saying, I really like politics, I really like this game, and then your career progresses, and that's where you end up. That's kind of how it's been for me, at least, and for my husband. So lobbyists are, a lot of times, interest groups are called on to provide expert testimony. A lot of times when a congressional committee is having hearing about something, you'll call in these interest groups to provide expert testimony. They give money to candidates. This is a lobbyist technique that helps interest groups gain access in a friendly ear. You contribute to these candidates, and they know that they're going to open their doors to you because you give them money. That's how it works. There are obviously limits on the amount that you can spend on that. Coalition forming. Interest groups attempt to bolster lobbying efforts by forming coalitions with other interest groups. Tend to be based on single issues, but there can be you can build coalitions for or against specific issues. That can be important in DC. Like, I represent a client who handles transportation. They're a transportation group in Nevada. We are their lobbyists, but they also are the members of the American Transportation Committee. They are the American Transportation Association. So that group represents a lot of transportation interests across the country. We represent them specifically based on their specific needs, but they're also hearing this broader, this group in Montana is also having the same issue, and so they can kind of band together for this one purpose. That's coalition forming. There have been a lot of attempts made to regulate the tight relationship between the lobbyist and lawmaker. The Lobbyist Disclosure Act in 1995 require lobbyists to report how much they're paid, by whom, and what issues they're promoting. There are resolutions addressing gifts and travel, tightening travel and gift restrictions. I have to every so often report on who I'm lobbying for, how much time I've spent lobbying for them, how much they pay us, and what issues I'm lobbying for them on. It is all posted on the Clerk of the Senate's website. It's all very open and out there. Direct lobbying of the president. Personal contacts within the White House are extremely important, and the higher up in the White House, the better. You really want contacts in the White House. The official point of contact between the White House and the interest group is the Office of Public Engagement. It's supposed to foster good relations between the White House and interest groups. Direct lobbying in the bureaucracy. So winning the legislative battle is only the first step. You also want to have the bureaucracy where these rules are implemented. Be your friends. So interest groups try to gain advantage by developing strong relationships with these regulating agencies. Many of them, here you go. Many of them you have a lot of experts on a topic that are employed by the interests being regulated. So it's not unusual to find lobbyists being hired by government agencies or vice versa, leading to the iron triangles we talked about in Chapter 9. So direct lobbying of the courts. A lot of interest groups try to influence policy by challenging the legality of laws or administrative regulations in the courts, usually by groups like the NAACP, ACLU, things like that. Sometimes these groups bring cases directly to the Supreme Court, and sometimes they're filed under amicus briefs asking the court to rule in ways favorable to their positions. One of the fastest and most powerful kinds of lobbying is indirect lobbying, using public opinion to get politicians to do what they want. Like Harry and Louise, like I talked about earlier, just this commercial that kind of gets under people's skin and makes you really think, and having the public reach out to the members of Congress. It tells you want to tell a compelling story and get the public to buy it, so they react to the pressure of what the interest group wants. A lot of lobbying involves educating and building and disseminating a compelling narrative, seeing things through the preferred frame of this interest group. Press coverage is important. Issue advocacy ads or advertisements that support issues or candidates without telling a constituent how to vote. You also want to mobilize the public, so you want to disseminate this information to motivate the public to lobby politicians themselves. On most issues, general public interest is low, and groups must rely on their own members for support. Some unconventional methods: social protests, mass movement. Social protests are public activities designed to bring attention to political causes, usually generated by those without access to conventional means of expressing their views. Then you have what's called grassroots lobbying. This is indirect lobbying that springs from widespread public concern. It really addresses people in their role as an ordinary citizen. And then astroturf lobbying, astroturf being like artificial grass, being like this is more artificial grassroots, more manufactured, manipulating or creating a public sentiment. There are a lot of interest groups that have resources, money, leadership skills, size, intensity, information. They want to make their voices heard this way. All citizens have the opportunity to organize, so all can exercise equal power, but not all interest groups are created equally. Some have more money, some have more effective leaders, more members, better information, and this translates into real power differences. Interest groups need money to conduct the business of trying to influence the government. They need to be able to hire staff to take care of the day-to-day operations, folks like me. They need to be able to hire the services of professionals in DC, like me, to help shape public opinion. They need to be able to provide campaign contributions. They want to be able to draft, have campaign contributions to folks who can draft legislation that is important to their groups. An intangible element of the success or failure of an interest group is sometimes the effective and charismatic leader or entrepreneur that can help a group organize even if it lacks money. Professional group leadership can leave mass citizenry with fewer paths to civic engagement. Eliminating one of the characteristics of interest groups of politics that leads pluralists to claim that interest groups can enhance democracy. Membership size is important, but the level of intensity that members exhibit in support of the group is also critical. Members represent the lifeblood of an interest group because they also fund its activities. Larger groups typically have an advantage here because of that. You can say, you are from South Carolina, why don't you call your congressman, why don't you call your senator from South Carolina? But we also have members of our groups from all 50 states, and so everybody's contacting their specific person, and so we can reach out more that way. That's more effective usually. One of the most powerful resources in an interest group's arsenal is information. And then citizens and interest groups, the people versus the powerful. Defenders of pluralism really believe that interest group formation helps give more power to more citizens. It certainly enhances democratic life. It offers more channels for representation, participation, education, public agenda building, and defining policy solutions. It really helps keep politicians accountable. Pluralists also believe the system as a whole benefits from interest group politics. If no single interest group commands a majority, interest groups will compete with one another and ultimately must form in coalitions to create a majority. Money, leadership, membership, and information can make an interest group successful. This can also raise red danger flags for democracy. We value political equality, one person, one vote, and anyone who attempts to vote twice on election day will be turned away, no matter how rich that person is. But policy is not only made at the ballot box. It's made in the halls of Congress, in conference rooms of bureaucracy, in a corporate boardroom, in a private office, in a restaurant, in bars. Interest groups speak loudly here and have the equivalent of these extra votes in the policymaking process. When you band together, your voice is heard more loudly, right? More loudly, louder. Anyway, okay. I hope that answers some of your questions about interest groups. If you do have more questions about it, this is what I do. And so it's not, I've spent my career working in Congress and working in politics, but, working as a lobbyist now is a lot of fun because I'm able to use some of the contacts that I've made throughout my career to get my clients some of the right answers. All right. Stay tuned next week for one more lecture and a quiz. And then the week after that, your final lecture and your essay is due. Please email if you have any questions, and I will see you next week. Bye.